Hey, welcome to the podcast. Joel here with Dad.
And looking forward to what we're going to talk about today.
We're going to continue the series talking about a new book I wrote called Keep It Light, The Freedom of Priorities in Life, Work, and Love. It's available now. It came out May 21st. You can get anywhere books are sold, but we've just been kind of working our way through the book. Dad was able to read the book, so I'm getting feedback from my favorite critic, or you're not a critic, but
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever you are. My dad, getting feedback from my dad.
Your favorite dad.
Yeah, my favorite
I'm your
dad.
top number one dad. Good.
Yeah, so we're on chapter 5, which is a chapter on margin, which, what does margin mean? Margin just means having some space in your life. Most of us, if we're a cup, I think our cup would be filled to overflowing with responsibilities and obligations. I love the quote I started with from St. Augustine in this book. He says, in this chapter, he says, God is always trying to give good things to us, but our hands are too full to receive them. How many of us would say, yeah, even if a good opportunity came along right now, I'm not sure. I was thinking about that the other day. Somebody was, a couple of years ago, somebody had offered me a free trip to Israel. And I had booked my schedule so full, I couldn't take a free trip to Israel. I'm like, sorry, I'm booked. So most of us, even if good things came along that we wanted, we're so bogged down with other obligations, which it's important to have responsibility, which we talked about in the previous
chapter.
But figuring out what's the balance between keeping yourself so busy, and I think a lot of times we just stay so busy to justify our existence, or it sneaks up on us.
Yeah.
So what stood out to you in the chapter?
Well, it's interesting because I was just looking at it and I was thinking, margin, because you were saying, what is margin? And I thought, well, we're talking about a book. And, you ever see a page where it's so jam-packed from corner to corner, there are no margins?
Yeah.
It's daunting to look at and go, no, it's ugly. You don't want to read it, but nice margins in here, by the way.
There are nice margins. I like the way they formatted the book. Yeah.
They gave you some space.
Yeah.
So, again, it's more pleasing to the eye, and it's also more pleasing to your life if you have some margins. That's what you're
There
talking
is something
about.
psychologically that when you're just like, oh, this is really pleasing to look at. Yeah.
Balance. Yeah. It just looks in balance and it looks good. And so, anyway, so you got some interesting quotes in here. Here's one that I thought was real quotable, but it's a real curious statement, because you start off in this chapter talking about how you can be a slave to things, and of course, we're all familiar with that. You don't own anything; it always eventually ends up owning you. But you mentioned here's a quote. If you saw this on a wall, what the heck that mean? When we're a slave to the right thing, it actually brings freedom.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Well, I talk about this idea that there's a word we have for situations in which a person is owned or oppressed by outside forces.
Mm-hmm.
We call it a slave. And so many of us, we're a slave to our schedule. We're a slave to our financial situation. But yet, there's this weird thing that Paul says, be slaves to Christ. And it's like, we're going to be a slave to something. I mean, the bottom line is you're going to be a slave to something because you're out of control of a lot of areas of your life. And Paul says this, but thanks be to God that though you used to be slaves to sin, you have come to obey from your heart the pattern of teaching that has now claimed your allegiance. You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness. That's a fascinating thought, because Paul is basically acknowledging we're going to be a slave to something. You get to choose your master. But when you're a slave to God and what he wants for you, it's actually his yoke is easy and his burden is light. It all ties together, that righteousness, where they seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all the stuff you're worried about will be taken care of. It all ties back to that idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember as a young believer when I discovered that, somebody told me that. I didn't discover it, but they said, you're going to be a slave to something. I thought, no, I've been seeking freedom, freedom. But the fact is, you have responsibility. You are going to be a slave to something. And if you say, I'm going to be independent, then guess who and what you're a slave to? You're a slave to yourself, and you're the worst taskmaster there is.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going on anyway. And so anyway,
Hold on, I got to comment on something. I forgot that was in there. That's a really great line.
What's that?
The whole concept is.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I don't get credit for that. Paul came up with that one, but
yeah. Well, because so much, I don't know, especially as you're a young adult or something, you're really seeking freedom. First of all, I got to get out from under my parents, then I got to get out from under school, and I got to get out from under, I got to go to work to pay bills, but and there's this whole drive within us to be free, and yet freedom brings the greatest tyranny of slavery. I mean, that sounds so counterintuitive to anything.
Without boundaries, which is interesting enough, the next chapter, freedom is tyranny.
Yeah.
because you have just, I mean, there's a book called was it The Tyranny of Options? No, what's it called?
Tyranny of the Urgent? That's not it.
No, it's basically a book about how, like, when you have too many options, just people don't know what to do.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
so when I go to the Cheesecake Factory, I'm like, I don't know what to do with this menu. This is
know.
crazy. There's too much stuff on this menu.
Just give me 5 choices.
That's why I love In-N-Out. It's like, do you want burger with cheese? Burger with no cheese.
I think that's been their secret to success too.
Yeah.
Plus pictures. Oh, I can see it up there.
Yes,
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, buyers in marketing, they say buyers with many options choose none. You've got to narrow the focus for them.
Yeah. Well, okay, so there's another one of these really amazing quotes in here, I think, that needs explanation, though. It says, one of the most faith-filled decisions we can make is to intentionally create margin in our lives. And I'm going, so how is that faith-filled? And
because of that St. Augustine quote.
Okay.
You really believe God has some good things ahead.
Okay.
You believe it so much that you're willing to give him some space to bring those good things, even if it means you're bored for a little while.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Okay, so it's a faith-filled decision. So you're not just creating margin just to be lazy.
No. Yeah.
You're creating margin because you're believing.
I don't think it's margin when you're not doing anything any other time either. That's just laziness. Yeah.
That's just okay. So you do have to have the script inside the book, but there's some white on the edges.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
but this book is written for people who are overwhelmed and
who need margin.
Overwhelmed, tired, feel like you can't keep up.
Yeah.
Lazy people don't read books anyway. So.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So if you're, answer that question.
So. In my IMHO, in my humble opinion, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So,
what did you have a problem with that line?
What? No. I thought it was interesting.
Oh, okay.
No. I just wanted you to explain it because if you just read it out of context, it's like, say what? How's creating margin in your life got anything to do with the walk of faith or trust? But when you realize that, okay, it's because I believe God has got other things for me, and also the fact that the world doesn't revolve on my shoulders.
Yeah.
It's not up to me to make everything happen, and God is in control, and so I can kind of take it easy. He did when He created the earth.
Which is what in the book I spend a whole little section on the importance of Sabbath.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating that God says the reason for the Sabbath is so you don't become a slave.
Yeah, that's true.
He says this. I hadn't seen that before until I was studying for this book. He says, remember you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Like, it's actually an act of rebellion against slavery that you can take off a day and not have to be a slave to work. I think that's a fascinating thing. God's like, it's for freedom. It's what Paul says, for freedom Christ has set you free. Don't become entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And how many of us, God's like, hey, I'll take care of this one day a week. You set it aside to honor me. And we're like, oh, but I got to catch up on everything I didn't get done that day.
Yeah.
He's like, no, just leave it aside and see what happens.
Yeah. And that is an interesting passage. I had never seen that one either. I mean, I'm sure I read it somewhere, but I'd always read the one in, the Sabbath, you take a day of rest because the Lord rested after He'd created the earth. So He rested on the seventh day. So therefore you rest on the seventh day. But that makes a whole lot more sense. I mean, because to honor the fact that God brought you out of slavery. So as Paul says, don't be enslaved again with the yoke of bondage of stuff. And of course, he's talking about works of the law and things of that nature, but it applies, just as it applies in the spiritual realm, it applies in the physical realm.
But what are works of the law? It's trying to get what you think you need. Approval. Yeah. So it all fits in the same thing. Yeah.
It fits in. So you're not trying to earn your salvation, but in the same way, you're not trying to earn your own approval. You're not trying to earn, being worth something in this life by what you do.
Yeah.
But by who you are and what God's doing in you.
And I think a lot of us, honestly, if we're honest, a lot of the stuff we create to do is just for the sake of justifying our existence. That was kind of one of the revelations I talk about in the book that Marcus, he's the pastor I serve under. We were going it was right when COVID had hit. We got a camera malfunction. Okay. Right when COVID had hit, he basically was like, we had to shut everything down at the church. We didn't stay closed for very long. We didn't know what we were dealing with. But when we rebooted, he's like, this is actually kind of nice. Because he's like, we can just reinstitute what we need for the operation instead of all the extra stuff that just slowly built up. And I had a friend, and he actually was recommending that business leaders regularly take sabbaticals every 3 to 5 years, because he said the beautiful thing about it is when you offload it, you know you're leaving for a month, right? So you can offload a bunch of responsibilities, and when you come back, you get to decide what you pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Because how often are we thinking everything depends on us, and when you offload it to other people, are like, oh, they're actually doing a pretty good job of it. I don't need to take that back on because it's been given to somebody else. I was like, that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
It's that, again, that's that idea of sometimes stopping things isn't failure.
Yeah. You mentioned here too that there's a more and more. Well, you talked about that a little bit. More and more research even that's showing that giving yourself space, giving yourself margin can actually increase productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like something triggered in your mind, or is it like you talked there? I mean, that's very practical. But other people are doing it, so I can find other things. You know, in business school, they told us only do what only you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, my goodness, that's really very little, because there are people more skilled than me, more gifted than me, more talented than me. And so that leaves very little for me to do, but that gives you the margin that when something goes wrong, you can be there for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at a lot of the greatest discoveries in science and stuff, a lot of them either happened in the shower or while somebody was writing. Einstein came up with a theory of relativity. This is the urban myth. Maybe it's true. He's riding on a bus, and he thinks the bus is moving, but it's actually the bus that's next to him going, maybe backing up or whatever. And so the idea that as you approach the speed of light, time slows down or whatever it is. I don't know what the theory of relativity says, but the idea that when you're relaxed, your mind is just free to kind of free-form think. And that's why a lot of the greatest ideas come up. People have it in the shower because they're just doing their thing. And it's the idea of sometimes, again, Einstein said this, no problem can be solved on the same level of consciousness in which it was created. And so oftentimes you're trying to solve a problem, and what you need is just kind of get out of your mind.
Yeah.
And I believe there's an element of the Holy Spirit speaking to you through that. But yeah, that's kind of what that idea is.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because there have been a lot of times when I've had a situation where I just really didn't know what to do about it. And I do what I call, a guy told me, turn it over to my spirit. Okay, so I'm not going to think about this. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to give it over to God. And when he's ready to give me the answer, it's not when he gets the answer, because he knows the answer, but when he feels I'm ready for it, he'll give me the answer. And it's been amazing how often when I was like in this situation where I had no answer, I thought about it, but boom, you turn it over to the Lord, 3 a.m., you wake up with the answer.
Yeah.
And there it is.
I hate the 3 a.m. answers because I got to get up. But you're right. That's true. And again, I don't know, maybe it's partly physiological and part of it's spiritual, but there's an element of when you kind of let it go and let it simmer, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then the answer comes that you're looking for, or a great idea of how to solve it.
Yeah. So you could work all day and work all night on it, or you can just kind of turn it over to the Lord. And it's not being irresponsible.
Yeah,
it's just saying, I've done my part.
Right, which goes back to that responsibility we talked about an episode ago.
Yeah.
But that's the challenge of it is...
well, I need wisdom from God now, so I'm asking. But if I'm going to ask, then I need to take some time to listen.
Right.
And be able to hear from him. If you go to a counselor and say, tell me to do. I got an idea. And you just rush out. Well, you've wasted it. He says, if you come to me and you ask for wisdom, I'll give it to you. But listen. And then do what he says. And it may take a while because he doesn't immediately respond. He's not, like we are. Boom. Wait upon the Lord.
Yeah.
And the answer will come.
That listening piece is important too, because I really felt like it was important to include in this chapter the idea that good communication requires margin. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes we don't know what we're thinking until we say it out loud. Yes. So oftentimes I'll feel the tension building between Emily and me. And we've just been busy, but she's snapping at me, I'm snapping at her. And finally, sometimes I'll go, when there's space for us to just talk, she'll go, I've been kind of mad. What you said the other day really ticked me off, but I didn't realize it until just now. And I had felt the effects of it, the glaring looks, but
not Emily. She
she doesn't do that.
But
But the communication, the space allowed for that communication. One of the things that marriage counselors say is it takes about 90 minutes a week just to communicate one-on-one what's happening, like just stuff you got to do in the family. That's not even counting emotional connection. So emotional connection takes even longer, which is why date nights are so important and making margin for that, which I'm the worst at. But that idea of good communication requires margin, because sometimes we just don't know what we're thinking until there's space to think about it.
So, okay, so pretty much you said busy people are only ones who read books. So everybody out there is like crazy, and I cram this into my schedule. Now, how am I supposed to make margin? What do you do?
Well, you got to start small.
Okay.
You first got to figure out, you got to choose what to lose, which is kind of what chapters 1 and 2 are about, is figuring out what's the most important thing right now. And
Got to jettison some cargo, huh?
yeah, and I mean, like, there's probably a lot of stuff you want to get done around the house, but if you start doing the math on it, your daughter's only going to be in the house 4 more years. Like, the stuff can wait, right? And you just kind of you really have to do it based on priorities, and then you've got to decide what to lose. And sometimes you lose something in one season, and God lets you retake it up in another season because it's just taking too much time. One of the things I talk about there is your greatest asset is time. You can always get more money, you can always get more energy, but time, once it's gone, is gone, man. So yeah, you've got to. It really comes down to figuring out what are your priorities, and then doing your best. There are some seasons it's just, man, we just can't let anything drop. But you want to do your best to always keep something that you're aiming at and figuring out what can we let go of, and maybe less of something. We're not going to do as much of sports or whatever it is this season. So, but it's always aiming at it, and again, it's always a moving target. So, yeah.
So kind of shameless promotion again here.
Yeah.
Hopefully this podcast is good and helpful, but I really do think this is your best book. Yeah, of course it should be. I mean, it's the latest one. You should be getting better.
I hope.
If you're getting worse,
I hope
that's
I'm
not a
getting
good
better.
sign.
Yeah.
So
yeah, keep it light. Freedom of Priorities in Life, Work, and Love. It's available wherever books are sold: Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble. And actually, if you order it, it's out right now. So, get a copy of it and figure out how to create some margin in your life. Thanks for listening.